Hello, everyone. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sanjay Swami, and I'm the co founder of MarTech Vibe Middle East, the first and only MarTech publication in this region with an active readership of 25,000 plus marketers across the Middle East and Africa. On behalf of my team, I want to welcome you all to another MarTech Mandate, a monthly briefing where we address trending topics in the world of MarTech and AdTech with regional experts. Today, we are here to discuss the applications of AI in marketing. In the digital marketing world, AI is used to bridge the gap between analytics and how strategies are used and executed. As a matter of fact, 72% of marketers interviewed in a PwC study considered AI as a business advantage. The impact of artificial intelligence on digital marketing is huge. A study by Smart Insights shows that out of 100 senior marketers from different industries, 55% of companies are implementing or already considering using AI in their marketing practices. Here in the Middle East, CMOs are now starting to invest in AI to track customer journey, personalize experiences, and predict buying behavior amongst other use cases. Today, we will take a look at how AI is reshaping the marketing spectrum so you can create better and more seamless digital marketing strategies. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel moderator for this session, Steve Locke. As a former global head of MarTech at The Economist, Steve led a storied content brand into a new era of growth and recognition with transformative ops strategy. His team has received numerous awards for the enablement of smart use of data in acquisition and engagement. Steve offers insights on how the confluence of tech, data, and content is monetized now and will develop into our future. Thank you for joining us today, Steve, and being a regular on our MarTech mandates. We are extremely sorry for bothering you while you were away on vacation, and I hope you had a great one.
Thank you, Sanjay. I was just happy to be able to actually go on vacation, but of course now I have to isolate, so there's always a price for everything. Thank you everyone for joining. I am very excited to be able to moderate today's session. I'm going to step out of the way to introduce our two guests today, where I'm very excited to introduce Harish Kundargi, who is the lead of ASEAN MarTech and Digital, and also the PO of APAC consumer data at the Coca-Cola Company, and also Namrata Balwani, who is a digital and customer experience consultant, and a host of all sorts of other things as well. They would do much better than me to introduce and talk about who they are and what they have done. So please, if we could start with Namrata, tell us about yourself.
Oh, that's the question that throws people off right in the beginning. So, like you said, I am a digital and customer experience consultant. I'm based in Dubai, but I think bigger than that is the fact that I'm very passionate about marketing, data, technology, MarTech tools, and that's the kind of space that I operate in. So I work with companies, whether they are established corporates or they are startups, and I look at their digital marketing, the strategy and the customer journey, and then how they are effectively using data and technology. That's my role. And in another avatar, I also teach at a university because I believe that all this knowledge needs to be given back to a lot of people entering the workforce today. So I teach marketing for postgraduate students.
Wonderful. Thank you. Harish, please tell us all about you and MarTech.
Thank you, Steve. And hi, everyone. Very warm good afternoon to everyone. Hope everyone is staying safe. So I think MarTech and I go back about 6 to 8 years now. I think I didn't get into this profession. I was sort of thrown into this profession in a way because I was doing quite a lot of other things. So I've been in 3 different industries. So I started off my career with banking, and then moved on to publishing, and then to FMCG. So I don't know what the future holds, but yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I think at Coke, I've been here for close to 2 years now. And I think our approach essentially at Coke is to rejuvenate the organization completely. And spearhead the digital transformation efforts in terms of, traditionally where we were, and then pushing our boundaries to see a vision where we utilize data, technology, and everything that it has to bring in terms of insights and analytics to spearhead in the next century and so on.
Great. So maybe we can start with the first question with you, which is, this can be a broad question, but I'm interested how are you using AI in your overall marketing strategy now, whether it's looking at the entire company as a whole or a region, or it might be interesting to understand and how that kind of breaks up in how the Coca-Cola company is actually looking at marketing it across its regions.
Sure, no, I think a good question. So I think I'll talk about structure first, and then we can go into some of the use cases that we've experienced. So I think how we are structured is each of the regions. For example, in our case, we have 5 business units within APAC. So we have China, we have Japan, we have Southeast Asia, we have India and Southwest Asia, and then we have Australia, New Zealand. So we have pretty much a lot of empowerment to take decisions and do stuff. We also have functional leads, or functional towers, as we call them within Coke, which are at a global level that direct the strategy around, how should we be looking at digital transformation? What are the key areas for us to focus on? And where our investment should go, and so on and so forth. But to activate it and localize it and really get the buy-in from business unit to business unit is really our sort of responsibility in a way. So I think in terms of AI, our main use cases have been around the advertising ecosystem, because we are one of the biggest spenders when it comes to FMCG space. And one of the things that's interesting for us in this region is we have just started the journey in the past year or so in our approach towards first-party data. There are a couple of regions that are pretty good when it comes to first-party data, like China and Japan, but the other regions are sort of lagging behind in this journey, and that's what we've been helping them on. So we want to leverage the advertising ecosystem for us to gain as much as information as possible around consumers or customers, because I think that's a channel that usually we tend to ignore, but that has the ability to give you a lot of rich data that you would not have access to otherwise.
Right.
And I think in terms of our AI strategy, is essentially around efficiency and effectiveness. Like, for example, when I have that huge amount of data that comes in from our advertising ecosystem, how do I know? Can I know the consumer at an ID level, at a personal level? Can I know how many times that particular consumer has consumed the ad, at what time slots, and so on? Then if I have first party data on that consumer, how can I match that consumer or customer to really correlate the consumption habits with the data that has been given, so that if I have to tailor messaging and then reach out to them based on different channels, like for example, somebody may be available on Facebook versus somebody may be available on Google, and somebody may be available outside of the walled garden ecosystem. So which one would be the best channel mix for me to send my message across? I think that's been a key use case for us when it comes to AI and in driving that algorithmic probabilistic models and so on. And I think one of the things that we're also doing, and I think this is something that most of us have had experience with in terms of our initial experiments with AI and stuff, is chatbots. So we've not experimented it a lot yet, as yet, but I think something that will continue in the journey, which is chatbots with natural language processing. So for us to create an experience for the consumers where the chatbot is able to steer conversations and only hand it back to a human when it's not able to answer, or it's a complex question which is really not defined within the boundaries of NLP and so on. And I think the last use case that we've we've been thinking of trying it out, we've just done a pilot, so on, is scaling the creatives. So we have had a few conversations with a couple of partners on AI-powered creatives that really create, that give you creatives at scale. So you just feed in one creative, and then it is able to create 100 or 150 different creatives based off of the initial feed that you had provided with different messaging. So that could also empower the advertising that I was talking about earlier.
So Harish, are you guys tending to build your own solutions inside of AI and data science, or are you sort of looking at what's available in the industry?
I think so far our approach has been sort of towards a hybrid model. So wherever we have access to data that we can bring in within the Coke ecosystem, I think that's something that we are trying to build internally, and then also build knowledge internally. Because I think that's the thing that we lose off, because say if we hire somebody from outside, they don't have the perspective of say the industry as such, and then our perspectives might differ from a different industry that they are coming from. So it takes a while for somebody to, like, even a data science professional, if we hire one, the nuances that we put in as variables. So for example, we could look at weather patterns, right? For example, like when do you drink a Coke? It's generally it's correlated with weather. When it's quite hot, you're more likely to go and grab a soft drink, right? So the variables that we put into the models are going to vary a little bit. So I think we tend to do wherever we are in control of data, we'll do it in-house. But wherever we have to rely on external partners. For example, the AI ones that I mentioned. I think creative. We've so far Coke is a highly creative agency-led model that we have, where I think we have some geniuses in-house, and then we also rely on expertise outside of the in-house colleagues to really come up with a campaign idea and execute it in full force and so on. But I think the AI one is something that we are trying out, because I think one of the things that we've not done very well, especially in the realm of advertising or e-commerce, they need a lot of creatives. And then you have to refresh the creatives every day, if not a couple of times in a day, or at least every week or so. So I think we just don't have the scale of creating those with the agency-led model. So I think that's our experimentation towards is how we can augment that with AI.
So there are a lot of things that have been thrown in here, right? We've talked about AI, data science. We've talked about NLP with natural language processing. We've talked about the need for more of this kind of skill set, and obviously from an enterprise level, we've got a lot at play, with Coca-Cola as a multinational. Namrata, I want to ask you, when we look at marketing as a whole, right? We're looking at AI as a whole. There's so many directions that this can go in. What kind of role do you think that AI can play and should play in this? And in particular, I'm interested in your perspective from being a professor and really looking at a lot of young people and talking about where this is now. Obviously, there are a lot of questions, that can be asked around this from a technical perspective, an ethical perspective. So I'm really interested in your perspective here in the can and should, because we know that it's possible.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. I think firstly, before I delve into the role of AI or what role it plays, the fact is that today a lot of brands do get very focused on the technology rather than on the why. And I think it's really important to pull back and look at the why. Why do we need this? What is working or could work more effectively with AI, or what is not working and AI could help in that? So otherwise what happens is that you could invest in a lot of solutions, but you don't have a lot of immediate applications. So then it ends up, you may end up blaming the technology when it's really not the fault of the technology. It's about the strategic vision. But if I just look at it as an overall perspective of the various ways in which AI can be used, the one thing is to improve the customer journey. So it's about predicting customer behavior, understanding what is their current journey and what are the ways in which AI can help. And for example, in the area of audience segmentation, so understanding more about the audience, predictive segments, understanding which segments are going to be more aligned with your brand, so that when you advertise, you try to reach out to those segments. The other way, and that's also where personalization will come in, so you would use the right kind of creative, you would have the right kind of website recommendations all tailored to that audience. The second area would be what I would say largely is optimizing and scaling marketing campaigns. So you want to have optimal bidding strategies on paid media. You want to use, so you want to move from, let's say, dynamic creative, which involved creating hundreds of creative and testing them out, to a predictive model and saying what kind of creative would work better, or what themes would work better with these audiences. And then you would look at even things like ad fraud. So we do know that in the industry, ad fraud is a big problem, and there are solutions today using AI that can identify whether, there is actually a viewer at the end or it's a bot, and create a lot of safeguards for brands to not waste their money. So these are some of the ways in which it works from a paid media perspective. And then the last bit is really about saying, optimizing the customer experience once that person has already become a customer. So like we said, conversational AI, what is the onboarding journey? How can it be made smooth without having a lot of manual intervention? Can you predict a customer's journey enough to send them reminders? So, you know, you run out of detergent every X months and it's automated, and Amazon certainly has done that a long time ago, but it's more about using the power of prediction to make this happen automatically rather than creating all these rules. So that's the broad theme, I think, under which AI can be used. There are many, many different uses, and also it works differently for different categories. So for a B2B SaaS company, predictive lead scoring is important. So when you do ABM, you still want to do predictive lead scoring and see what kind of customers are most likely to convert to your solution. If you are a B2C company, you are looking at the recommendations on your website. Or, so if you're an e-com company, you want to know how to effectively sell the right kind of products and brands on your site to an audience. So there's all of these different areas. What you also touched on is important. It's about being ethical. And I feel that there is definitely a fine line between personalization and being creepy. And we need to understand what that line is. There was I'm sure everyone follows Marketoonist, but you know, he comes up with these absolutely brilliant gems.
They are.
There was one a while back where a husband and a wife were sitting at home, and the husband has given his wife a gift, and she's opened it out, and you know, it's an orange sweater, and he says, "Hey, I got you a gift," and she's like, "Yes, I know, because the ads have been following me around for a week." So these are some unintended consequences of personalization. But it's really important to understand that there's a lot of data that we store for customers, but how do we best use it to improve their buying journey and think about it from their shoes, rather than think about it as how can we make the most money off this thing?
Sure.
That's the distinction.
So it sounds like, you know, it's really about the experience here, right? If you don't use the personalization for good experience, then really you're in the realm where you're making things even worse, right? So you can use the kind of information and data that you have for good or evil. So in terms of experience and consumer experience, Harish, I wanted to ask you, in the FMCG market, I know that, and with you guys in particular, you know, you're not in the place exactly where you have lots and lots of first-party data to work with, right? So what are your kind of consumer experience challenges there, and kind of what are some of the interesting things you're doing in that space?
Yes, Steve, I think another good question. So traditionally, FMCGs have struggled with gathering first-party data. I think the challenge is that we are not a digital company. We are a goods company. And then obviously there's a lot of clutter within the goods company. So if you just walk down your shopping market and then you just look at an aisle, you'll have maybe like 100 options for just buying a detergent. So how do you stand out in such a space and so on, unless you have a very appealing proposition and so on. So I think that's the challenge that we face. And I think typically what FMCGs have done across the globe is consumer promos, because that's the primary way of collecting data. Like I would have a promotion which says, you know, you buy 5 Cokes and then get a voucher to watch a movie and stuff like that. Right. I think those are generally the mechanics that I think those are still the mainstay, because one of the things that you will struggle with is fraud within the promotions itself. So if you do not have, or if you do not safeguard those promotions, it's very easy for you to write a script or game the system in a way where you could have a bot crawl the website and then have like thousands of entries. And even like if there's a sophisticated hacker, they can hack into your promotion system and maybe mail all the prices for themselves, or maybe download all the digital vouchers that you have up there. So there's a lot of PR damage that can be done if you are not very careful with those kind of like experience and stuff like that. But I think the differentiating factor would be something that say a Red Bull does. And I think that's where I think we take inspiration from Red Bull. So when you say Red Bull, you immediately associate Red Bull with energy, right? With experiences
Sure.
which are like, you know, adventurous and so on. So I think that's the differentiator, where I think we want to create something where as soon as you hear Coke, you're able to associate Coke with an experience like that. Now that experience could be gaming, that experience could be music, that experience could be food. So all of those things we've tried out in several markets. And I think that's key to sort of create differentiating experiences. And then how do you bring it to life? Essentially, because I think one of the things that we're also moving away from is sponsorships. Because that's essentially, I mean, it doesn't, there's no defined value as such today to say, yes, this sponsorship deal has landed us, X amount. I mean, there are various calculative methods, but I think it's to be taken with a pinch of salt. So because there's not a lot of measurability around that topic. And I think we get scared when there's not enough measurability around what we can measure and how we can define success and so on. So, and that's why we are moving away from that approach or that model to create meaningful partnerships. So for example, we're talking with food service aggregators to say, can we create something that really unlocks true value within the platform itself? And then, so for example, we can create bundles with Coke and then have a campaign around it. So there's a tangible value for the partner, there's a tangible value to the consumer or customer, and then there's a tangible value for Coke. And then we can keep track of the KPIs by looking at the transactions that it has to offer. When it comes to gaming, can we design a game, or can we partner with a gaming company to create something which is of value to the customer? When it comes to music, similar things. Can we partner with like a music group, and can we have music that's driven by Coke or Coke enhanced experiences? So for example, you may have heard of Coke Studio, pretty popular in Pakistan, pretty popular in India, pretty popular in Philippines, in this part of the world, huge fan following. And I think the whole premise of Coke Studio is bringing up stars from the bottom and then really making them into stars, and then having them collaborate with industry leading voices. I think that's like like any star's dream. Like even if you're just starting, I would love to see myself on stage with my idol who I worship in a way, right? So I think that's what Coke Studio does. So it's about meaningful experiences for the consumers and connecting the emotional experiences along with it. So I think that's where we're looking to move towards.
So these sponsorships have really changed in their very nature, these days, right? I mean, when we talk about influencers and their sort of place in the world and the impact that it actually has, and it's personally, it's quite an interesting area to look at. And Navarta, I'm interested in your experience too, because you've worked across tons and tons of brands as a consultant and advisor. And, what does that look like, in your experience as well, where consumer experience is fragmented and lots of us are looking at AI as a potential way to kind of stitch those experiences back, especially in the loss of, data that we've got now.
Sure. Firstly, as Harish was talking, I was remembering a lot of campaigns I've done in India for Coke. Right from creating a whole video series that was short videos customized to every state in India, and which would have been so much better if we had a lot of technology and machine learning at that time. And then you spoke about competitions. Back in the day, I've done tons of those SMS competitions for Coke and Nestle and a lot of brands, where again, it was very manual. And today, technology would make so much difference to that. So it just took me down memory lane. So what's important here is that you see that different categories have different things, right? So when you look at a CPG brand, first-party data is a huge challenge. And without first-party data, it's harder to do, let's say, a lot of great personalization on your website. You're dependent a lot on third-party data. But some of my experiences with other brands have been that if you look at retail and hospitality, these are legacy brands. They have a lot of legacy systems in play. It's not very easy to get clean data. And once you clean the data, it's not very easy to access it. So that's how you use cloud-based solutions. And that's where AI comes in the form of maybe investing in a customer data platform or in a good CRM tool that also has a marketing automation with good personalization. Now, these are challenges for retail and hospitality because a lot of the data sits in disparate sources. So a lot of time and effort goes in putting that whole thing together and then trying to create something meaningful out of that data. And also this is an always on journey, because once you create that golden record, and a golden record for everyone who's listening, and I'm sure you know, but it's basically taking all your data from first party, third party, your internal systems, loyalty program, e-com behavior, all of that, putting it together, and you have this golden record. It needs to be maintained consistently. And in the Middle East, the other challenge is that we have a lot of transient population. There are people who come, who work, who leave, or people who work in the UAE, but then they go to Saudi, or then they go to Oman. So these are, challenges of this region in specific, which are still harder to overcome. And that's where a lot of time is spent on how to put them together effectively. Versus when I look at other categories like D2C brands, or startups, let's say, who are just starting out. And when I work with them, their challenges are that they are so geared towards acquiring customers, and that's the race. It really is a race to acquire as many customers as possible. That
growth.
Yeah, exactly. But they don't always have the right tools to make it happen, because if they are pre-series A or they are seed to pre-series A, they don't have a lot of funds to invest in big technology. And that's where the growth of no-code tools has been a huge boon for D2C. Startups, and these are the tools that help these companies really make effective use of that customer data, so that you know what kind of customer to go after, what kind of segments are important, and you can choose the right kind of lookalikes to target. Because at that stage, it's very important to get the right quality of customer. Otherwise, you're going to face a backlash or a huge churn, and that's not going to help your growth numbers. So it's, for me, what's interesting is that every category has very different challenges, and you have to look at it from the holistic perspective, but you also have to say, what is a primary business objective for this year, for this market, and then try and build it through that, rather than trying to do this massive AI exercise and putting everything together at the same time. One example I think I like to talk about is something where I worked previously with Fitness First, and Fitness First is a big gym chain. It's the largest gym in the Middle East. Now, when you approach fitness, you can say that, yeah, when the customer is interested and I call them up and I ask them questions, I'm going to find out why they want to join the gym. And let's say the reason is weight loss. I'll say, okay, here's a weight loss program I can recommend to you. But if you think about it, every gym does the same thing. So how does Fitness First differentiate its customer experience and onboarding journey from any other gym? For that, what's important is, how do we collect the right kind of data that helps us understand this before the customer actually makes a call, or before the customer fills in a lead form. And this is where the strength of third-party data comes in. Of course, there are different challenges in third-party data now. But let's say once you have third-party data, the person has come to your website, you are now able to track what kind of content they consumed on the website. Did they look up yoga, for example? Did they look up weight training? Did they look up personal training? We are capturing all this information. And then we're asking them, let's say, 5 or 10 questions on why they want to join the gym. What are their motivations? And that really helps to understand, let's say a woman wants to lose weight for a wedding, or she wants to lose weight because she had a baby. They're two very different mindsets of why you would go to a gym in those scenarios. So trying to understand these mindsets, so by the time that customer becomes a lead and lands in the inbox of a salesperson, that salesperson has a predictive lead scoring already score with him or her, but they're also able to understand the mindset of the customer. And therefore, when they talk, they don't just talk about the gym straight off. They talk about very specialized solutions. None of this, to my mind, requires AI. It does require machine learning, and AI will come next. But this is a really, really important step in an onboarding journey that any brand could use today if they were to effectively capture data and then think about, how do I sensitize the people who speak to my customers to know them better and pitch them the right solution?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's such a big point there, because people are complex beings. And we've got logistical sides, we've got emotional sides. And I think when we talk about AI, we talk about machine learning, we talk about data science, we're starting to look at these kinds of marketing technologies to help us to kind of unpack some of the complexity, there, so that we can start to help make some of these decisions, and to get to know our people, our customers better, whoever they are. So inside of that, there's, I think, a very important concept here, and I think across industry and across companies, that single customer view, right, is this kind of magic, mystical, kind of thing where I think there's a reality and there's a dream, as to what that is. Do you think, I want to ask you both about, do you think that we are finally in that place where one of the best applications for AI, and let's use AI in a more generic marketing term perspective, where we're talking about machine learning, natural language processing, data sciences. Do you think that AI is do you think that single customer view is that it's such the sort of golden application for AI technologies at this point?
Who's going first?
I think you can go first.
Okay. So I think that yes, the idea of building a single custom view has become important also because, as we know, we are talking about the phasing out of third-party cookies. We're talking about privacy on apps and a lot of changes that are being introduced by Apple. So what's increasingly happening is that first-party data is assuming a lot of importance. But to be really honest, first-party data in and of itself without third-party data doesn't have context. Because in first party data, you only know the customer and their interaction with your brand, but you don't know a lot about their other behavior, interest, and so on. And that's where third party adds a really good layer. So today, if you ask me that, is that really, really critical? It is, because a lot of these things are going to change down the line. And it's important to have this information today. And AI can help tremendously in that, because it looks at, the identity resolution. It's going to look at predictive modeling and segmentation, and then it's going to look at how that data is effectively used for programs. And therefore, that single customer view lends itself to then doing a whole lot of things in marketing automation and CRM and conversational and NLP and so on and so forth. So I'll say that for sure today, the data side and building the single customer view is really important. And AI plays a huge role simply because, especially for legacy businesses, data is so vast and in so many places that trying to just build that identity itself is quite a challenge.
So, I mean, Harish, we mentioned earlier that one of the areas that in where you are is quite different, is that there's not as much first-party data, that you're working in. So how does that actually look if you are looking at building that kind of view around a particular single customer, so that you can know how to interact with them the best?
So, Stephen, I think very good question. And I think before that, I think I got reminded of something that Namrata was speaking about. And I think at Coke, we always debate, because I think we come from the science aspect of things, and then we meet with our designers, and then they will be like, no, it is the emotion within a creative that does the influencing and not your science, etc. So I think we've debated that at length, and I think we are in a position where both of us agree that yes, it's both the elements that do have a role to play. It's just that I think we are in the journey to establish how exactly and what exactly. So I think I just got reminded of that when you mentioned the emotional aspect. But yeah, I think first party data, I think, has been a challenge. So I think that's why we can't look at advanced use cases where we talk about, say, identity resolution and so on, because we know so little about our consumers in the first place, or our customers in the first place. And that is why what we are sort of augmenting that gap is with our partnership with DSPs. So what we have done is we speak to DSPs, and obviously we have our muscle in terms of the spends and so on. And then we try to negotiate a data partnership to say, when an ad is served to a consumer, or when somebody clicks on an ad in whatever channel, obviously outside of walled gardens, can we get log level data? Because the log level data contains a lot of enriched data on segmentation, on different types of audiences that they belong to, plus device IDs in some cases. So that's essentially what we sort of partner with them on, and then bring that data in to our ecosystem. Obviously, we'll run some algorithms to say, the existing data that we have, what is the match rate for the data that's coming out of DSP? I mean, usually it's not a lot. And we're just getting started on that journey. But yeah, I think the match rates is something that we hope to improve as we collect more first-party data. And obviously, I think one of the important elements related to that conversation is the whole mindset of running campaigns with a data focus. So I think previously what has happened is, since we've been sort of in the middle of an agency-led model, the whole focus is on getting the campaign live. And I think the whole focus is on look and feel of the experience itself. The focus is never on data. And then if the focus is not on data, obviously there's no tech empowerment behind the data. So
well, is there, sorry, is the question with the not focusing on the tech and data because there are a lot of people that are afraid that this is the death of creativity?
Not really. I think it's more of awareness and the value of unlocking the data or what data can do for us. And obviously coupled with privacy concerns. So I think if you talk to the legal community and so on, unless you are able to make a good use case. So for example, I think when we speak to DSPs and stuff, if we go into a mode of having a legal person in the room and we try to explain to them what a DSP does, I'm pretty sure they'll say immediately, let's stop this engagement right now. So I think it's a territory which has a very thin line. So it takes a lot of effort for us to sort of package that information and translate it into a language that the legal community understands and is comfortable saying that, okay, let's go ahead with this approach or with this engagement and so on.
Sure. Namrata, I wanted to ask you also, I mean, the death of creativity, right? We've talked so much about people and logistics and emotions and first and third party data. There's zero party data, there's second party data. Where is the creativity, in in our current world? How do you feel that that's changing in a particular way with the introduction of all this automation of decision making? What people are going to influence the most by or react the best by or the worst? Where does that leave creatives? So many people go into marketing to be creative. Where does that leave us?
Yeah, interesting. And I'm going to come back with another marketonist one that I read. And this is a meeting situation in office. There's a man and a woman. They're discussing the fact that we found that our marketing is ineffective and annoying to customers. And the woman says, well, with the right software, we can annoy them more effectively. I do think that there's very different ends of the spectrum. There are brands like Coke where creativity comes first, and that's what you really remember. And it's all about human emotion at the end of the day. And even if Coke does not use AI, people are going to see that commercial, or people are going to share because it touches them. And it's the same thing with Nike. You see that throughout the coronavirus and lockdown, Nike has released so many campaigns, but they've all become things that everyone has watched. And there wasn't any AI or technology in that, it was understanding. So I do think that we should not lose that side, because the other end of the spectrum is brands who use it to create thousands of boring pieces of communication on a daily basis. I do find that in the Middle East, we are guilty of that a lot. So for example, my bank sends me, I hope my bank doesn't hate me after this, but my bank sends me tons and tons of SMSs every day. And it's very clear they know nothing about me, right? But it doesn't stop them from sending these messages. And I stop looking at them now. So it's pretty much a waste of investing in automation and sending out all these messages. And on the other side, you have the fact that customers are exposed to these messages all across. So we see messages on social media. We see them, every time we're browsing our phones, we see them through in the Middle East, still through SMS because it's a big channel. And there are emails that land in our inbox. And 99.9% of that you probably ignore, because it's not interesting enough for you, right? So this is where I also feel that the best kind of technology can do nothing for you if you really don't think and go back to the basics of marketing. It's still about human psychology. It's about understanding ethnography, understanding cultural nuances, and crafting communication, and then letting technology optimize or predict what would work better. But if you just use the technology to send out boring messages, it's definitely going to become the death of creativity, and that's a bit that we need to keep in mind, because I do feel that it's gone a lot more on the technology side, but brands, I think as a consequence, are under-investing in creative, whether it's in-house creative, whether it's creative agencies, whether it is good copy, all of that still has a very, very strong role to play. And that power can be 10x with the right automation.
Can I ask you then, I'm going to paraphrase one of the questions from one of the attendees. Marwa Barwani has asked if COVID's actually forced a lot of brands to transition the way that they work digitally, because we've been forced into this sort of, everyone has to be digital now, whether you're a consumer or a brand. Does that actually change the way that marketers approach AI and what it can and should be doing for us?
Yeah. To my personal perspective, and yes, while COVID has led to this whole change and everybody wants to use it, I feel the current handicap is not about using AI. It's about having data in the right place and the right format to use AI effectively. So I think a shortcut of trying to apply AI on something that is fundamentally not a strong foundation is where brands are going to suffer. And they need to not go after the whole machine learning and artificial intelligence side of it yet. They need to focus on how we get all the data in the right place, because that is a true challenge, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in India, certainly I think in a lot of Southeast Asian countries also. And those are the areas that brands should really invest on, whether it's in creating the right kind of data scientists in-house or thinking about their data and taxonomy. That's more important today, and then bring AI on later. Currently, yes, the whole theme is about, okay, can we use chatbots? Can we do some prediction? Can we understand how to reduce churn? Can we understand what items are going to sell more? Which is great, and that also needs to be done. But it can only be done if the data that you're using is pure, or as pure as possible.
Good, thank you. I want to paraphrase another question that's been asked by Manora and also Fadl. Harish, specifically thinking about your own organization, of course, there are lots and lots of significant challenges, right, with how you actually action all this data that you've got, right? We've talked about single customer reviews. We've talked about trying to pull out patterns and translate that into customer experience. There's a question also around omni-channel interaction. So I would imagine that the Coca-Cola company would be quite interested, right, in all sorts of channels across as a large enterprise. So when we think about some of these more some more interesting, more current channels, when we're talking about OTT, we're talking about IoT, we're talking about WhatsApp, we're talking about different chat programs that allow that ability for us to kind of reach in, assuming customers give us that information. We've got these available, right? We've got all of these channels available. Do you have some insight as to, not just kind of how you use it, but the challenges in actually getting those to work well?
Sure, Steve. I think another interesting question. So this has been, again, a topic that we've debated quite a bit internally, because there are so many channels and you can only pick the most relevant ones or the most emerging ones for your use case or the brand's use case and so on. And obviously we have a portfolio of brands. So when we think about any activation, we'll have to think through with the lens of the brand and the messaging that the brand has to communicate to that audience. Because say, for example, the audience for Coke will be different than the audience for Sprite versus the audience for Fanta and so on. So all three are Coke brands. So I think for us, we have this framework that we call as integrated brand experience, IBX. And essentially what that framework is, it's a concept that allows or that inspires marketers to think about seamless or boundaryless communication. So whatever you're communicating on a pack, which is our real estate, the same message has to be communicated across different channels. So be it on screen, be it on shelf in an e-commerce aisle. So for example, not just the product, but then the messaging that goes along where you have some real estate for your share of voice and so on. So I think that's the mainstay of the thinking. And that's where I think that has led to, I think we rolled out this framework a couple of years ago. And I think where we are now is before any activation goes into effect, there's a close collaboration between marketing and commercial teams, because they own their own different pockets of relationships and so on. So to make sure that this IBX framework is really coming to life, if one of the elements is missing in terms of a communication gap, then the campaign doesn't go live. So I think the important point here being the seamless communication or the consistency of messaging across different channels. The formats could be different. The consumption could be different for different audiences, but the consistency in what is being communicated and what do we want the consumers to take away from that message, I think that needs to stay focused and relevant in all the channels.
Great. Namrata, I'm also interested in your take. You've worked with so many brands that we've talked about, and I think we've so much of today's bits and pieces have been built on the backs of giants and what we've really done. How does that kind of look different or the same when you're consulting, or versus when you've been in-house in these brands? And do you have a kind of interesting example of how you've been able to take all of this kind of data that you've got outside, create an interesting experience in some way for a particular brand, or set of brands?
Yeah. So there's definitely a difference in being a consultant or being in-house. I think when you're in-house, there's a whole lot more control on how you put together a structure and a timeline, and you get to move a lot of pieces together. But what's also important when you're in-house is that data doesn't only come from marketing; it comes from sales and operations and finance and a whole lot of pieces, right? And you are able to therefore interact and see that entire view of what does it take to grow a business, to grow revenue, but also maintain certain KPIs. What does it take for that to happen? So that is very different from being a consultant, because here it's about as much information as is shared with you, or certainly the process of discovery is a little harder because you have to push a lot of the questions rather than house where a lot of people just come running to you expecting you to magically have a solution to things. So there's differences in both, but what's exciting about consulting, again, is, as I said before, is about being able to work across so many categories and understand how that works. So for example, today I go in a single day from thinking about data and MarTech for a B2B SaaS company to thinking about it for a health tech startup. And again, the audiences are different, the markets are different. So those are some of the things, but I think just from the context of interesting work, the bit that I spoke about earlier from the fitness perspective, and that was just the onboarding journey, but really creating that entire data journey and understanding customers better led to not only better onboarding, but also then understanding how does that person actually consume the gym space? What do they like? So you're in the gym for, let's say, an hour and a half. What is your behavior there? Which led, and once you capture all of that, it leads you to understand what kind of services you want to offer inside your gym that are going to be of value to customers. So you may think that coffee and X, Y, and Z are great value, but for customers, it is a completely different story on how they perceive what they're given. And if you're able to therefore build it omni-channel by understanding their online behavior, their consumption of the brand, their understanding of how they interact with you on social media, and then creating for them an experience in the gym that is a let's say a reflection of their online interests, then it becomes that much more value for their customer. And we've seen a lot of change in how the churn rates have gone down, how retention has improved as a result of that. So that part of the journey was really, again, taking a lot of this data that we capture offline within the gym, but translating that into digital, and so that you can effectively do better omni-channel marketing.
Thank you. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to close by asking you both a question that we were exploring in the MarTech Vibe mandate last month, which was the death of the cookie, right? The cookie crumbling. I'm interested, how are you feeling about that? What does that really bring up for you in terms of hope or disaster or change or an innovation? Namrata, if we could just continue with what you were saying.
I think it's a mix of both. There's a bit of hope and there's a bit of disaster. I think from the the hope side of things is really that I read a lot of studies about how customers, they want personalization, but they also want their data to be secure. They also don't want it to be used in the wrong ways. So from that perspective, it's great for customers to have that empowerment to be able to control as much as is possible. I mean, unless you're living under a rock, it's impossible to erase everything, but at least they have more control on how they're able to interact with brands. But from the marketing and the brand side of things, I think the concerns are a few, and those are, can we do effective marketing this way? Can we still personalize experiences for customers? Is this really going to just make Google richer? And let's face it, that's a question that we ask, right?
Probably will.
It probably will. So because the moment Google is creating a privacy sandbox and the data is not leaving the device, they are in a sense building a golden record for themselves. So they become owners of that. And then they can use it in many different ways. And we do know that the see no evil slogan went out a few years ago, right? We've read enough on that. So there is that concern also of how much of power walled gardens are going to have, whether it's Facebook or Google, and how they're going to be gatekeepers of access to customers. That's definitely a fear.
Harish, how do you feel about this in your context, or in Coca-Cola's context?
Yeah, I think again, similar sentiments. I think it's a mix at this point in time. So essentially, we see it in two different lenses. So the first one being, I think it puts the ownership back on brands to meaningfully connect with consumers and really be in control of the data that they have, and then create properties or experiences where they could be in a one-on-one conversation, hopefully moving towards that aspiration with a customer or a consumer, right? So I think that's one. So I think with that approach, it gives us a lot of impetus to push that agenda within the company to say, now this is happening outside, so let's take control of our own destiny and so on. And I think from an advertising perspective, I think advertising has always been a dark, in a way, there's not much transparency into how handshakes happen, how data gets transferred.
Black box,
yeah, it's a complete black box in terms of cookie exchanges or ID exchanges or anything for that matter, right? So, so I think when we speak about this whole cookie event to DSPs and DMPs, they're actually quite hopeful that something will emerge out of it. So there'll be a new ID, probably a mobile ID, which anyways Apple has announced that which essentially kills it in a way.
Yeah.
But maybe that could be something that they are hopeful for. And I think if they are hopeful, and there's not much despair within the advertising community, I feel like we should be hopeful too as brands.
Thank you so much to both of you for engaging and also being so open with talking about your experience and your thoughts about what's happening today and the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Still off your holiday, Steve.
Well, I'm fresh on the holiday, and I won't pretend that it was a terrible holiday. It was great. Sanjay.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time out and being with us. Steve, obviously, he's just come back from his vacation, and he's here with us on the panel today. So thank you so much for that, Steve. And for our audience, I hope you enjoyed the session. There was some great insights shared. Do send us your feedback, as it will help us build better content for the next editions. Up next, we will be going deep into AI use cases with a focus on AI-led personalization. We will be announcing the dates for this mandate soon, so make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And do not forget to subscribe to our newsletters. Thank you once again for joining us today. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye. See you next time.
Bye.